Welcome to Building Innovation, the podcast, convening experts to discuss issues and solutions.
Welcome, everyone, to the Building Innovation podcast, where each month we convene subject matter experts to support advances in building science and technology. I'm your host, Johnny Fortune, and I am super excited today to be joined by a good friend and colleague, Dr. Carrie Sturts Dossick from the University of Washington. Welcome, Carrie.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I'm excited that you are here because we get to do a deep dive into the National BIM standard, specifically the Project BIM Requirements. So I know that you worked a lot on this. You've worked a lot with NBIMS throughout the years on several versions of the National BIM standard. Mm-hmm. And also we had the opportunity to work together on a project called the National BIM Guide for Owners a few years back. So thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, I'm excited to have a chance to talk to you about it. And it's more exciting and interesting than you might think from the title. So we'll get into it.
Yeah. So we always like to give our guests an opportunity to connect with our audience. And so we like to ask you a few questions, just a little icebreaker question. So if you would, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Thanks. I'm a professor in the Department of Construction Management at the University of Washington in Seattle. I currently serve as the Associate Dean for Research for our College of Built Environments. So I wear multiple hats throughout the day, taking care of a lot of things about research on campus. I've gotten into research. I've been in my role of faculty for over 18 years and have been focusing on emerging technologies in design, construction, and operations. So when I first started a while back, the new hot technology, the new emerging technology was building information modeling. So I got involved studying that really from the beginning of my research career, and have been working both with a lot of industry partners and with National Institute of Building Sciences, as well as the academic work. So,
yeah, you've been heavily involved, and I've been fortunate enough to be on quite a few calls with you over the years. I know we've had a lot of conversations and a lot of virtual calls, a lot of in-person committee meetings, and so on behalf of NBIMS, thank you for all your involvement over the years and the contributions you've made and the contributions you're making to the industry as a whole. You have quite a tenured history of helping to move the industry forward. So just curious, and again, you're not only a colleague, I consider you a friend. So it's just great to have the opportunity to interview you. What's new with you, Carrie? What's going on with you right now?
A lot going on around here. My lab is thriving. We're getting more into the digital twin side of things. So the adventures beyond BIM there. Did some really interesting work for cybersecurity. One of my new projects that I'm really excited about is a digital twin for the I-90 bridge. I'm partnered with several industry partners and folks across campus to develop a pilot for that. So new adventures going into bridge and looking up things like bridge information management.
Yeah.
So a few new adventures on the academic side, and then my kids are in 8th grade, so super busy family here.
Yeah, a lot to juggle.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing that, you volunteered for many years on the National BIM Standard. So I want to just kind of transition to the National BIM Standard because you've been very much involved, not only as a contributor and helping to develop the standard, but from an administrative standpoint and overall strategic guidance and leadership for the direction of the standard and what the new standard looks like. So again, pleasure to have you to talk about this and give your firsthand experience of working on the National BIM Standard, or what we typically refer to as NBIMS. So please give us your perspective on the development of this latest version number 4.
Yeah, great. Well, I'll say that I was involved in version number 2 on both the program committee and the technical subcommittee. So that was my first entree into this kind of work. I did that pretty early on in my faculty life. So I was doing it to expand my network and understand how these national standards worked and understand BIM implementation across various parts of the country. So when I had a moment, version 3 had finished, we had gotten feedback on version 3, and I was looking for kind of my next step. It was a good alignment between what I was working on and what we needed to do next for the BIM standards. So version 4 became my sabbatical project. And I smile because that was quite a while ago now that I started that. And I'm long since, done with sabbatical and back into academic life. And continue the project to see it to the finish line. And what we took was we took the feedback that we got from version 3 and sat down and had a workshop. And I remember you and I, Johnny, were together there in DC and talked about what we need, what the country needed, what do standards need, what does the industry need, how can we partner with and complement national and international standards that are going on elsewhere, not to duplicate things, but to complement them and align with them. So we had lots of different goals to accomplish. So we brainstormed. I think that we actually made what we envisioned that day during that workshop. I think we came up with this concept of a unified standard that brought some really important elements together and created modules, created a library of standards, recognizing that BIM standards isn't just one document, but actually multiple documents. So we came up with this concept of libraries with modules, and then identified top priorities, and the Project BIM Requirements was one of those top priorities. At the time, the insider name was called Core BIM or Minimum BIM, and we played with different ideas and names. And the final name, of course, is the Project BIM Requirements Standard. So we launched from there and developed our working group. And Connor Christian was the chair of our working group. He's now at Kiewit, and he was instrumental in getting this thing done. So I was the co-chair of the planning committee. Well, I was chair first, and then vice chair, co-chair with John Messner for the planning committee, and then the PLC liaison to the what became the Project BIM Requirements working group. And then the working group, really amazing group of volunteers from all across the industry, multiple sectors represented. And we spent a lot of time working on developing the original content of that standard.
Yeah, that's interesting. You mentioned the original content, because there was what many people may not know about NBIMS is previous versions really consumed a lot of other content that was already developed. It was kind of a compilation of other standards in the industry, and this version definitely has some novel content. And I think one of the biggest pieces of that novel content is the Project BIM Requirements, which we were heavily involved in. So, just a side question: how often do sabbaticals roll around for you in academia?
Yeah, typically you're eligible every 6 years.
Okay.
And sabbatical can be a short time. It can be a year-long time. There's different versions of sabbaticals. Yeah.
I'm only asking because I'm glad that we were able to get this completed in just one sabbatical cycle for you, because I know there was quite a few years. Yes. I think the work groups had about at least 3 years in on the development, and then the planning, which you were very much involved in, really is upwards of or beyond 5 years, if I'm not mistaken. So there was a couple of years, a lot of work that happened in kind of setting the direction and the strategic ideas and compiling them together to get the roadmap to move forward. So, wow, very dedicated, and a lot of great volunteer effort, and a lot of information pulled together.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, we had to, in terms of that kind of early planning, reconfigure the way we were going to develop the standard, because we needed to think about what are modules, how do we set those up, how do we wanted to create an agile process. So setting up a process for the agile process was part of the early work that I did as part of the planning committee. So,
Yeah.
and really trying to formulate the planning committee as a committee that was active, right? They were the ones really doing the heavy lifting of the planning and setting up the working groups, and then the working groups developing the content, and then taking on that original content development. Yeah, because I thought it was pretty interesting work, because we recognized that when we looked around the industry, both nationally and internationally, there's a lot of great project requirements out there. So a BIM project requirement is a project requirement in general is anything that the owner deems as being important for the project. They might say, gosh, we really need to have an owner representative that's going to commission this building, right? And that's a requirement of the project. So BIM project requirements are the requirements that the owner defines to include BIM in the design, construction, and potentially operations of the facility. So they're often included in contract language and outline the requirements for the team to do the work with building information modeling. So they're often actually incorporated into what is known as owner project requirements. So in the standard, you'll see that the owner project requirements should include X.
Yeah.
So we recognize that the industry has been doing BIM for a while, and this is not necessarily a new thing. And there were many owner organizations who developed very, very robust and successful project BIM requirements. So we compiled all of those, and we, as a committee, the first thing we did is we canvassed the whole community, put it out there to the whole community, and said, send us your favorites. What project BIM requirements that you like? And so we had, I think, a set of 30 or so, and then we voted as a committee which ones we were going to include in the analysis. So then we had, this lovely set of documents, and then students in my lab spent time to do what's called content analysis. They went through and coded all of that content to say, what are the main elements that are included in project BIM requirements? So then we had this great database of all the different clauses that included in different examples under certain types. And what we learned there was that if you take the main categories of all the different examples, no one had it all. Everybody was missing some components. And what we realized from that analysis is that what we really wanted to create was a standard for project BIM requirements. That is, can we define the basic elements of project BIM requirements that are needed in these kinds of documents so that project teams not only have a standard way of working and approaching, but that all the information they need will be included in those requirements. So that's what we ended up creating. It's not an example or something that somebody could take as, well, we'll get to the example. We made one of those too. But what the standard is a standard set of concepts that need to be included in the project BIM requirements. So for example, the very first requirement is you need to define your deliverables. What are your BIM deliverables, or what are deliverables that are related to BIM? So we in the standard, we tell you how and what needs to be included when you define a deliverable in your project BIM requirements. So that's what the standard ended up becoming because of our analysis of the best practices in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, that's fantastic. I mean, just grabbing the extant data and analyzing that, how that helped shaped what it needed to be. That your team was able to identify where, not just the common denominator, because sometimes that's what we do, right? We with content analysis, sometimes we're looking for what are the common denominators so that we capture those pieces. But I do think it's very interesting that your approach took it another level up to say, what are the pieces that only exist in one or two standards, but they're still meaningful pieces, and to come at it as a very holistic approach to what the project BIM requirements needed to be. That's fantastic. And even though I've kind of been in a lot of meetings and discussions, that's something I have learned. And just as you were talking, I didn't realize how many different standards and documents that you all consumed and analyzed. 30 is quite a bit. That's a lot of information. I've seen some of them, some of the requirements, and I did a similar exercise many years back when I was writing standards for a firm. That's a lot of information to go through. A lot of information.
Yeah, yeah. No, we had great students working on the project, and they, wrangled these documents, coded them up, and helped the industry working group be able to understand all the content. And in fact, we continued to use that content analysis, because then once we agreed on the structure of the BIM requirements standard, then we were needed to write each of the requirements. And then we handed out the assignments to the working group, and each member of the working group took a chunk and read the content that was analyzed for them. So quality management, somebody picked up that. And from the content analysis, they were given those examples from the coding that were examples of how different standards in the industry have been using, or rather different requirements in the industry have been using or referring to quality management. So we use the content in building the standard, because we're trying to kind of gather the best of. So it's interesting because it's not quite the common denominator. There is an element of that, of kind of finding what are the proven practices from the industry. So it's proven practices, but also kind of the best of, kind of who did it well. And then we spent multiple meetings, almost probably a whole year, each meeting walking through, doing line by line walkthroughs of the draft. So we compiled the draft, right? Everybody had put in their pieces, and because it was all kinds of different people, some were long, some were short, some were lots of different styles. And so we went through line by line, and as a working group, reworked each line. And we actually have in the standard, it has the category. So say deliverable, quality plan. And then it has a statement that defines what you need to have in your BIM requirements that define the deliverable for the quality plan. So you have the category itself, and then we define the content requirement for that category. And that makes up the standard. Now, while we were doing that, we had lots of great examples from all of this content analysis. So we also drafted a second document that is our example language. So if you're a new owner and you haven't really done BIM, but that seems like a really good idea based on your reading, one, hire a consultant to help manage your BIM process if you're thinking about it. But two, you can take the example language and use that for your BIM requirements language, because it's been pretty vetted, from kind of taking the best of. We avoided quoting from anyone directly, so they're all kind of original content, but definitely inspired by the best in the industry.
That's amazing. I love that there is that example language, because you do have owners kind of on different points on the spectrum of where they're at in their journey. They're defining their data strategy, or implementing BIM, or what they're requiring. I like the fact that if it's an owner that is really setting out to specifically define all their requirements very specific to them, that you have the framework there. But it also works for an owner who says, I really don't know. I don't know what I don't know, and I just kind of need to jump over and be able to use this example as a guide. So that is fantastic. The example language, I think, is really going to be well received and adopted along with the standard. So I think that's a huge benefit to the industry.
I also think that even for owners who have well-established BIM requirement documentation, that using that template language or that example language would still be useful, because to kind of compare, okay, what are we saying? Is something missing, or is there a new idea in the example language that we might want to incorporate? So it could be used as kind of a quality check for existing standard or existing requirement language, as well as giving people some examples if they don't have Or like you have, like I said, nobody had all of the things, not
Right.
all the content, right? So if you're missing a chunk, you can start with our example language and then modify it to your context. So
Yeah, I mean that is absolutely great. I just had a conversation with a group of folks that on that very thing that they already had BIM requirements. So how could they use this? And I think I shared the exact same thing. This sentiment is that, hey, this is a great way to make sure that you have, for lack of a better way to describe it, all the bases covered. You know, each topic you have addressed that is important to you.
Yeah. I'll buy somebody a cup of coffee if they can show me that their BIM requirements have all the elements that are in our national standard before they reviewed our national standard. If they can show me that, you get a cup of coffee from
A
me.
free $10 cup of coffee, right? So you mentioned the standard and you mentioned example language as a resource. There's also a guideline. Is there anything you want to share about the guideline and what's the premise behind that document for this module?
So the guideline has things you would expect, because it's kind of, what is this thing? What is this Project BIM Requirements standard, and how are you supposed to use it? We also cover a description of the development process, so you can see a list of all of the reference documents that we have used. So if you're curious of like, oh, is my my Department of Transportation document in there? You can kind of go look and see who we referred to there. And then there's a big section towards the end to compare the Project BIM Requirements standard with the ISO 19650 standard, which is an international standard for BIM delivery. So there's a big part of the standard analysis was looking at how we align with and complement ISO 19650, because as I said at the beginning of our discussion here, that was a goal of ours from the beginning of the V4 effort.
Yeah. I also participated on the reassessment committee, and one of the goals too for the new version is to be able to have sections of the National BIM standard to readily available and to be able to be used in a contract. So refer to it in contract language, and really a big piece of that is the Project BIM requirements, right? That it allows people to comply with this module or this section or this subsection of that module. So that's really groundbreaking, because before this version of NBIMS, if someone said, in their contract language, comply with the National BIM standard, people didn't really know what that meant. It was, you really couldn't define or there wasn't much tangible to it, what they meant by that. This now gives them the opportunity to be very specific in developing their owner project requirements, how they want BIM to be used, be able to reference it in a contract, and have a clearer path of getting the project team on the same page of what that means.
Yeah. I think that it's our standard, the Project BIM Requirements standard, is a bit meta, because it's you wouldn't necessarily reference it directly in the contract, but it's actually is your contract in compliance with the standard. So it's actually a standard for the contract itself, as opposed to a standard you would reference in a contract.
Interesting.
Yeah. There may be instances where you reference the Project BIM Requirements standard. If you're requiring somebody else to make one, then you could say, if you're making a Project BIM Requirements, then you need to be in compliance with this standard. So whoever's making the requirements, they're the ones in compliance with the standard. Whereas some of the other modules, the BIM execution planning, BIM uses, COBie, those are all ones that you can envision referencing in the contract, right? That you want to be in compliance with the COBie standard or all of those things. And in fact, our standard references the other modules, so you can see where we recommend and actually, as part of the standard, can require that how and what ways the BIM requirements would reference the other modules that we're putting out in V4.
Yeah, I think you've kind of answered this, but how do you want the industry to use this, and not just industry, not just individuals, but there's other organizations that help develop contract templates. There's like many governmental type agencies that have their own very specific language. So, what would you say to all those groups of people about how to use the Project BIM requirements?
Yeah, I think BIM requirements is often a subset of a larger document. If you're looking at a contract, BIM requirements is a subset of the things you might put in your contract. And we actually debated that. There were some parts of our BIM requirements standard where we were wondering if it should be there or if it's actually meant to be elsewhere. That should be a contract. It should be in the contract, but is it in the Project BIM requirements or not? So there are some things that were, and I think we ended up saying in the standard for those items, like, if it's not in the contract, you need it somewhere. But if it's in the contract, you don't have to put it here. I think that's how we decided to deal with it, because we didn't want to not mention it because it's important. But if it was mentioned in the contract, then you don't need it in the BIM requirements. All that to say, these things got much more interesting than I initially thought. I think, contract language, it's so dry.
Yeah.
I'm not a lawyer, I'm an engineer. So I just couldn't quite, but once we got into it, the debates around terminology, I was also the chair of the terminology subcommittee. Once we got all the 4 modules done, we needed to come and do a crosswalk exercise of the terminology across the modules. And we had a whole series of meetings where we literally walked term by term through it until we were down to the last term. And it was fascinating, kind of trying to be really disciplined about the terms that we were using and how we were using them and how they apply to the different contexts of the different modules, and making sure they were in alignment, both with all of the modules that we were working on, but also in alignment with other outside standards that have become more common. So really I would say that one of the themes of the whole exercise of NBIMS-4 was alignment.
Yeah. Yes.
Really find internal alignment and alignment external as well. So I think we worked really hard to get there, and I think we did a pretty good job of achieving that goal.
Yeah, I think that particular module, the Project BIM Requirements module, also helps tie together some of the other pieces like the BIM execution planning and the BIM uses and COBE. It provides a lot of glue and really, I think, helps users begin to rationalize the different pieces and how they work together. And we
show where they go. Yeah. Well, I actually think I didn't answer your question. You asked me how I envision or want people to use it. And as I said, in our analysis, no one had a complete set of concepts. So for even those people that are listed in the content that we used, it would be great if those owners took our standard and did a review of their BIM requirements documentation and saw, oh gosh, we're missing these elements, or there's examples here or requirements here that we haven't yet considered. Let's consider them. So I think there's a lot that could be done to do quality checking of existing documentation, existing project BIM requirements or owner project requirements. And then for new users, right, it does give you a really good guide for what are the kinds of things you need to specify to your project teams in order to have a well documented requirements package for your design and construction teams. Because one of the things that our working group talked about, many of them on the group were designers or builders, would say, coming to a project, the owner saying they want some BIM, but not fully defining what that was. And so when you got into the project and the BIM that was delivered wasn't the BIM that the owner thought they were getting, then there was disappointment and missed expectations. And seasoned designers, BIM managers from design firms and BIM managers from construction firms were getting really good at asking lots of questions at the beginning and using their BIM execution planning processes to dial in on the expectations. But we found that there would be a lot of benefit if the Project BIM requirements were well defined at the beginning of the contracting process and even in the bidding process, or the RFP response process if it's not a bid, to get a shared understanding across the people that are coming to the project, that they know what they're signing up to accomplish. Particularly in times of change, as technology changes, it's hard to have a good sense of how to develop the estimate of the commitment, right? That the design teams and the builder teams need to commit resources to these projects. And if there's not a clear sense of how BIM is expected to be used or what the deliverable requirements are going to be, they may not have assigned the resources properly for that work. So
yeah, it's very good point. And I continue to hear some of those pain points in the industry that you just mentioned, especially about expectations and managing the expectations.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. So this does that really well. I think if you use this standard to develop BIM requirements, you're going to have a really good set of expectations at the end of the process.
Yeah. Well, let me switch gears just quickly, Carrie, because I always like to give our guests an opportunity to tell us what they think are some of the challenges, opportunities, solutions, or emerging technology. And I know that I threw a lot in there, but just kind of what's front of mind for you about where we're at in the industry and kind of what you're seeing.
Yeah, there is a lot to talk about. I mentioned digital twins already, cybersecurity, IoT, smart cities, smart buildings, robotics, AI, ML. Like, I can list all the new technologies and talk about those things. I think I have something that is on my wish list, something that I would really like to see happen, and that is in this world. And it's partly not just our tools that we use for designing and constructing, but it's also just our tools for life, our emails and our social medias and our wayfinding devices and the screen that's now advertising me at the gas station. We get so much information, and I'm finding it's landing in really random times. You know, you open your email and I'm trying to think about this interview, and I'm thinking about instead, you know, a question that somebody else had about a different project. And so I find we're often being randomized, and it would be really great to have the information we need when we need it, and kind of being able to curate the information so that I can sit down and say, okay, I want to think about the National BIM standard right now. And my computer gives me that information, right? It's like, oh, here's the new podcast, and here's the latest status for this working group, and hey, there's a new invite, and wouldn't that be great? So I think if somebody could use AI for good, that would be a good outcome.
Absolutely, I would be a subscriber because I'm also in need of help with information overload. I want to kind of wrap up here with a very fun question, and I've known you for several years, so I got to reach way back to find something here that none of us, including myself, would know about you. Something you want to share about yourself, or a funny story, or something folks wouldn't necessarily know immediately about you. Do you have anything you'd like to share with us?
I'm not sure if you know this or not, but I do have a superpower, and that is I am a choreographer of modern dance. And I have been so since I was 3 years old. Yeah. So when I'm not an engineer and a mom, I am a dancer and choreographer.
That is so interesting. So you've been dancing since you're 3, right? Is that what you said?
Yes.
So that is an interesting mix, Carrie, of engineer and dance, right? It is really, it's very very interesting, because a lot of times people do they do classify engineers as being very analytical and being very structured, and then the dance obviously being very creative, and so you've got both sides of your brain working there.
Well, I have a story about that. So as an undergrad, I really got into choreography in my undergrad and started a dance company, like as a dance club, right, in undergrad. And I did end up majoring in engineering, but there was a short time where I had registered as a minor in dance, but I ended up not being able to fulfill that and just focused on engineering. All that to say, in my graduate degree, I was thinking I was TAing and I was taking advanced classes, and I was like, oh, I don't know if I can choreograph this semester. I know, should I do it? And I was working on a problem set, and I forget what it was, but I'm sure there was lots of math in it, driving something, and I was just really stuck. And I decided to take a break, and I listened to some music, and I made up a phrase, and I decided, no, I just love choreographing. I'm going to do that, and I'll just make time for it. And I sat back down at my desk, and the problem set was clear. And I was like, oh, well, to get through graduate school, I'm clearly going to have to dance and choreograph.
Absolutely. That is great.
Really helpful, lovely thing to have in my life. And I've just been grateful to have the opportunity to continue to do it. So
that's awesome. Well, let me just recap a couple of points, some things that I heard today. Thank you again for coming by. And just to recap for our audience, the Project BIM Requirements is a brand new content that's inside of the National BIM Standard. It was developed over some very rigorous analysis, some content analysis, and we're gathering a lot of information from different project BIM requirements. And this work group that helped develop it really sought to make sure there was alignment and it was cohesive with other standards, but also bring together a very holistic set of standards that could be utilized. Even for those who already have Project BIM requirements, they can use it as a quality management measure to check. How does that sound, Carrie? Does that sound like a pretty good recap of the things we've talked about? Do you have anything you want to add to it?
Sounds great. Well, I encourage everyone to take a look at it and give us feedback, because I know it's the first version, and I know we'll have more work to do and refine it. And you might, as you use it, there might be things that you have in your standard that you say, hey, wait a minute, you guys should add this. We want to hear those things. And if there's something in there that doesn't work, we want to hear about that too. So I foresee we're still in the process of standing up our next version and our next iteration and the next working groups. But I encourage everyone to get involved, either just using the products and giving us feedback, or serving on working groups and getting into the weeds with us. Come debate things with us.
Absolutely. There's always room for more terminology debates, right?
That's right. Always room.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank our audience for joining in and tuning in today to the Building Innovation Podcast. Also want to thank you, Carrie. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your knowledge, wisdom, and experience and your humor with us today. Thank you so much. Come back in the future. I know we've got much more to talk about.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
So to our audience, you can subscribe to Building Innovation, the podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts. Be sure to check out the NBIMS YouTube channel for more great content. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and share it, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Building Innovation, the podcast, the official podcast of the National Institute of Building Sciences. For more information, visit our website at nibs.org.